There are some people who can't stop innovating. You're about to meet one of them. Welcome to the FLIR Delta podcast, where we bring in leaders within the drone community and discuss their insights, perspectives, and unique journeys through the unmanned industry. I'm your host, Randal Warnas. In this episode, I sit down with Chris Andserson, CEO of 3D Robotics. Chris has been one of the most instrumental figures in the evolution of drones. From the difficulties of manufacturing to the promise of artificial intelligence, we dive deep into his outlooks on the future of the drone industry. Well, Chris, we're going to talk a lot about drones today, but before we get into that, who is Chris Andserson outside of the drone world? You talked about geeking out. What do you geek out with outside of drones?
Well, so 10 years ago, I put the letters DIY in front of drones because I thought, you know, why should the military have all the fun? I've been waiting 10 years to do that again with some other industries. So when I'm not doing drones, I do autonomous car racing. And we have DIY robocars. And every 2 months, we have in a big warehouse in Oakland, California. We have cars that basically work just like Google cars or whatever, with deep learning and cameras and LiDAR and all this kind of stuff. But they're about this big, and we race them head to head on an indoor track at sort of scale speeds of about 100 miles an hour, and they crash a lot. But because there's nobody on board, nobody gets hurt, and we get to do kind of cutting edge autonomous car work. But the cars don't cost more than about $200. They crash, nobody worries about it, and we have fun.
So what kind of people are being involved also in that? Is it
exactly like it was back in the drones? We have Google engineers, and we have retired guys. We have high school students, and we have PhD students.
Amazing. Are you any good?
Oh, I'm terrible. I'm the MC, right? I find the space. I'm pretty good at putting the tape down on the ground. Got a good playlist, for the music. I'm actually not terrible at the software, but not as good as most of the others, and I don't compete because that wouldn't be fair.
So, I mean, just to take the opportunity, you talk about a playlist and a good playlist. What's something that's on that playlist that what defines Chris as far as a good playlist?
Oh, music. I'm into bands that are actually new. I'm not like stuck in the 80s. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think I'm slightly more on the electronica side, but this doesn't sound particularly new, but there's one good track on the new Justice album. There is I have a bunch of kids, and we have a hot tub. And so what we do is every Sunday night we have a hot tub dance DJ session where everybody has to bring their favorite songs from the week.
What?
And we sit there in the hot tub, and everybody kind of rotates around and introduces somebody to something good. And so I'm as cool as my kids are, which is cooler than I would be
really
otherwise.
Cool. Yeah, cool. Well, something that fascinates me, and part of the honor of sitting with you, is understanding, getting through this journey of becoming the CEO of 3DR. And 3DR has a storied history that we'll probably touch into a lot, but what was that progression like? What was that journey like? And how does it feel, or how did it feel the first day you become CEO of 3DR?
Well, I'd been essentially a CEO before. I was the editor-in-chief of Wired, which is essentially CEO of a similar size, company, and I'd started a bunch of smaller companies in the past. So being a CEO by itself was not that radically different. You're a boss of a different thing. Raising money was at the time, it was relatively easy. I'm based in Silicon Valley, and so it was kind of a cool idea. What was really tricky was basically turning my hobby of like nerding out with drone software and drones, etc., into a company, and realizing that it immediately stopped becoming a hobby. It was like all the fun part of stuff I'm not allowed to do. Instead, I had to do finance and regulation and compliance and HR and things like that. And to immediately make your hobby not fun. It was a little bit of a surprise. I was like, what do you mean I can't do the engineering? It's like, because you're the CEO, you can't do the engineering. That would be wrong.
Right.
It's the CTO. The story of the 3DR is that it was not designed to, I didn't set out to start a company. I set out to start a community. The community took off better than I could expect. It was largely came out at the same time as the iPhone in 2007. And so the thesis was that the drones prior to that were, Lockheed Martin, General Atomics, you couldn't touch it because it was, exotic, export-controlled military secret technology, but that in an iPhone was basically all you needed. The sensors, the processors, the wireless, the cameras, GPS, and all that. So my bet was that if you just sort of drafted behind Apple's innovations, you could come at the drone problem a different way, but sort of bottoms up, cheap, easy, open, and all that. And that worked great, and that was true. And then everyone, the first generation said, yeah, well, absolutely fab my own PCB and compile my own code, et cetera. And then the next generation comes along, they're like, I don't know anything about fabbing. What you're doing is amazing, but I don't know how to fab, I don't know how to compile, can you just make it for me? I'm like, yeah, we should probably make autopilots and things like that. And so I thought, well, I had a guy I met on the internet named Jordi Munoz who was really good at that, and hand soldering the boards. And then that took off. And it's like, well, I guess we can't hand solder boards anymore. Now we need like a factory. And now we need like pick and place machines and reflow ovens and stencil printers and CNC machines. And one day I woke up and we were running a quite large electronics factory in Tijuana, Mexico. And that was kind of like, how did that happen? I mean, and today, and then we got out of hardware because DJI was doing so well, and we got into software, and now I'm running a SaaS software company, which again is fine, except for we're doing SaaS software in the construction industry. And now I'm like spending all my time wearing a hard hat and a green vest on construction sites talking to high school graduates about concrete. And I was like, how did that happen? And every one of these steps was totally, I guess in retrospect, totally predictable. At the time, it was like, how did I get here? I mean, it's fascinating and a journey, and every time you were there for a good reason because you felt like you were really doing something useful. But you literally, I'm in the construction industry.
Yeah.
By accident.
Right.
And every one of these steps has been essentially by accident.
And you relish in that, right? I mean, that's a good thing?
Absolutely. Well, when I was, before Wired, I was at The Economist, and I joined The Economist in '94 to start the internet coverage. And '94 was pretty early in those days. I'd been in the science world where we used the internet, but only for science. And there was the notion, Wired magazine in '93, sort of came out with this notion that there was, a broader potential of the internet to change the world, culture, and all that kind of stuff. And yet everyone was kind of, the traditional telecoms industry was mystified as, who are these internet people? They don't use ISDN, they don't use our intelligent, networks, they're not telecoms people, they're just sort of connecting computers with wires. And, and so the title of my first survey, which is kind of like the book length or half book length introduction to a topic that The Economist does, was the accidental superhighway. The internet was an accident. It just was a happy accident. But the notion that the greatest inventions of our time, largely happened because of the circumstance of like the right people in the right place with the right attitude. And 99% of the time it doesn't work. But when it does work, it gets big. And I guess what I've done is I've created these circumstances by which happy accidents can happen. But every time they happen, it is an accident, and I am like, I did not expect to be, that to work. I didn't expect it to work this well. I didn't expect to end up in the construction industry.
Right. So I think to that question, what has been your greatest triumph as CEO of 3DR? What was the one moment that you were like, wow, that was a good take, that was the right decision, or I'm so happy that I'm here?
It's like everything else in life, there's no finish line. I guess there's a finish line when you die.
Sure.
But you never, somebody famously said, they were asked, why don't they write their autobiography? And he says, because I'm not done. There's chapters yet to be written, and they're, but then it's too late. So we've had, great successes, but every one of those successes is of a moment. And every one of those is going to be then followed by a challenge. We were the leaders in like drone autopilots for a while until we weren't. Mm-hmm. We were selling hundreds of thousands of consumer drones until we weren't. And so every one of them has always felt like you don't get to win forever, right? You get to win for a moment, and then the world will catch up, and then you're going to have to go do something else. And so I would say my greatest success is persistence. It's just being able to kind of pivot and be flexible and move, with the industry, so that every morning I'm doing something scary and new again, but I'm doing it.
Right. So I think I was at CES 2016, and it might have been NAB, but I know I was in Vegas at a big show.
NAB.
Do you know what I'm...
I think so.
So there's this Forbes article.
Oh, no, that was a year later, yeah.
Okay, so I'm Forbes article, and I'm reading about Chris Andserson being like, we're not doing manufacturing anymore.
Yeah, that sucked.
You had to humble yourself to a significant degree to not only shut off this thing that you built, but also to go in front of a large publication and say, this is why and this is how.
I didn't choose to go in front of that publication that came to me, but yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was all your fault, wasn't it?
I would have asked to understand it, so I'm grateful for that article.
Because you were at DJI at the time.
Sure. I was at DJI at the time, and it was a mystifying thing because 3DR was the technological pusher to DJI's. Sorry, 3DR was the technological pusher to DJI at the time.
At the time, and then DJI responded to that push beautifully and became not only a technology leader but also an economic leader. I would say if you're going to lose to a company, lose to the best. And I felt at the time that we lost fair and square to one of the best companies in the world. And not only that, but we were privileged, cursed, to witness the birth of a 21st century Chinese company that did not show the traditional weaknesses of Chinese companies. Everyone said, oh, don't worry about the Chinese, they can't do X. And maybe X was software or design or marketing or globalization. And since I'd lived in China for 4 years, I knew that they were wrong. But even I knew they were wrong about those things. But even I thought there was an X, and I thought the X was going to be open platforms. And so I said, okay, DJI is crushing on everything, but they're going to be a closed platform, and I believe in ecosystems and open platforms, etc. And there was a lot of skepticism in China about open source, but the notion of kind of the middle ground of an open API and a SDK and that kind of stuff. Once DJI did that and did it well, I was like, that was impressive. That's showing a kind of a world-class nature that we have not seen by many Chinese companies to date. And it was just, it was clear that there was no light at the end of that tunnel. So the bad news is we got out of hardware. The good news is we got out of hardware early, and then everybody else who did not recognize that DJI was doing so well they bled for more years than we did.
Sure. So Mark Cuban says this thing about his success was driven by knowing his competition, knowing them in and out, knowing their weaknesses, all of that, and I guess in this instance, that's you did a lot of understanding of DJI and what their values were, I would assume.
I have mixed feelings about that, about what Mark said, and that, in general, the advice you normally get is don't pay any attention to your competition, because then you'll just be, you're going to be following them, or you're going to modest incremental improvement, and if you ignore your competition, you'll do something truly innovative. So that's the normal counter to this one. In the case of DJI, I don't think it was as granular as know them really well. It was clear that we were in the presence of a new species. I think that we were the first American company to encounter a truly 21st century company, certainly on the hardware side, and that there would be more. And I was kind of, I think I was just like, it's like you're on the frontiers, and you get the first shot, with a superior life form. What they say, that no species survives contact with a superior life form. We encountered a superior life form. I don't think it was actually about DJI. I think this was a catalyst of everything that had been working in Guangdong for the last 10 years. And this, we were seeing the 21st century's economic battles kind of playing out, and we just happened to be there first. So it wasn't so much that I understood DJI particularly well, it's that I felt that I understood China particularly well. And China is not our enemy. China we announced today a partnership with Unique. China is absolutely an essential part of our ecosystem. But I realized that we couldn't compete with China. We had to work with China. And I think, if we'd found some way to work with DJI, we would have. And now we do, but only on the software side. But this was, I think I was lucky enough to be one of the first to both observe and feel 21st century China, in its raw power, and we adapted accordingly.
Yeah. So as a CEO and someone in this drone space that's very highly respected and maybe one of the thought leaders in this entire industry, who do you look to for inspiration? What kind of people do you model, some of your thinking after?
I try not to model my thinking after people in the drone industry. Not that they're not great, but again, I don't like focusing on narrow competitors. I mean, we all have heroes. Elon Musk, I suppose, is he an anti-hero now? I don't know. He's complicated. But clearly, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, people like that. My mentors have always been almost kind of philosopher kings, people like Kevin Kelly, who wrote Out of Control, about the kind of, out of control, accidental. You can see the connection there.
Right.
People like Tim O'Reilly, who helped create the open source movement and famously said, create more value than you capture. This notion that, that IP should be shared and you will benefit from sharing it rather than just holding it tight. So those are my main sort of North Stars. And in terms of just day-to-day technology stuff, I mean, again, the reason I continue to run open communities of innovation is that we every weekend when we race, you have to bring your best technology and it has to work against other cars, et cetera, and you have to fix what's broken right there. And just sitting there in a hackathon experience like this, watching brilliant people do something that's never been done before, and on the fly in the real world with noise, with like data noise and challenges they've never seen before. I think I get more out of those moments than almost anything else I read about, from a distance. Doing teaches me more than observing.
That's amazing. So you have done the site scan software, and there's both a thermal and a non-thermal element. What are the aspects of site scan that you are most proud that you accomplished? Because 3DR has always been a very innovative company, not a copycat. So you've done very innovative things. What do you feel like are really the staples of the site scan software that you're proud to put your fingerprints on?
So what's interesting is that site scan, which is data software rather than drone software, was that was what we pivoted to. Now the software itself is interesting, but what was more interesting is understanding the industries in which it's going to be used. So we can write all sorts of data processing and filter levels and photogrammetry and all that kind of stuff, and that's fun for us. But actually understanding the needs of the construction industry and understanding the future of the construction industry and understanding the pain points in the construction industry, and then turning that into code has been the part that's most interesting to me. So now we learn about things like volumetric calculations, change detection. We'll get to thermal in a second. But the exercise of not being nerds and coding first and asking questions later, but going out and asking questions first, and spending time on site, understanding how money flows, how where projects are over budget and over schedule. Why? What does it happen? How do people communicate? What is the supply chain between the the client and the construction company and the subcontractors and the architects, et cetera? Where are the labor shortages, et cetera? And then turning that into code has been the most fun. We started, Autodesk is one of our investors, and so we started with their space, which is the built world. But we just announced this morning that we're also partnering with Esri, which just does geospatial stuff. And this gets into a much bigger question about, as we now have the ability to measure the world so we can manage it better, you're seeing the convergence of industries. So geospatial, GIS and Esri, used to be about satellites. And it was like the globe, whereas architecture, Autodesk, was about buildings. So you had buildings, which were really precise, but kind of on a relative coordinate system. And then you had the globe, which was on an absolute coordinate system, but not very precise, because satellites. And now as drones, manned aircraft and drones and even ground sensors have kind of made It increased the resolution and the accuracy of the geospatial stuff, and the Autodesk, you know, the architecture and engineering world has moved from houses to neighborhoods to city blocks to entire cities. It started to get out. So you see the geospatial side kind of microscoping in, and the AEC, architecture, engineering, construction side, telescoping out. And you see these convergence of different ways to do what's called reality capture, measuring our world. And just that, recognizing we're part of this much bigger thing of measuring the world, and then figuring out, okay, great, we've got the vision. We understand that, you know, we're part of this digitization of the planet. How do you actually work with these companies? You know, they all have APIs and SDKs, and, you know, FLIR's APIs and SDKs are another example of that. How do you build a system that can seamlessly interact with all these microservices? And you end up with a very modern cloud-based system, and you end up building essentially something that looks like the internet. And that is, you know, maybe I could have been smart enough to just say, let's build something that looks like the internet. But it was actually having to go through that journey of discovery that I realized why we build something that looks like the internet.
So we've talked a bit about how you feel like open source is a huge deal, and drone code is something that you are part.
Yeah, I'm the chairman.
You're the chairman, and are you the founder of the concept as well? Okay, so I know a bit about drone code, but if you were to drive, you know, some information about people to build on drone code or understand the mission of drone code, what does that look like? Yeah,
so drone code is the open source, I guess, it's the leading open source consortium. It's part of the Linux Foundation. We call it like the Android of UAVs. There's, you know, actually the keynote I just gave here at Introdrone was specifically about this. So normally the argument for open source is just kind of, you know, philosophical, which is to say, you know, open, you know, can innovate better, you know, it certainly is cheaper, can be more trusted. But it wasn't until recently where there's been a sort of a paranoia about DJI, and you know, some federal agencies banned it on grounds I think were unfounded, but nevertheless the political climate we're in right now is like that, and they demanded an alternative. They demanded a trusted alternative. Now, normally a trusted alternative for the government would be like Lockheed Martin or Boeing or something like that, but because it's 2018 and we get open innovation now, they're like, you know what? We want an open alternative on the grounds that it's transparent, and we can actually see the code, and we can verify the code, and, you know, we can you know, have our many vendors use the same code. And so this, you know, in a weird sort of way, that the China crisis and the paranoia about China has been a real forcing function for adoption of the drone code stack, because it offers an open alternative to a closed, non-American solution. So I mean, you know, I can't. Once again, you know, accidental. I cannot believe I'm a beneficiary of random tweets out of the White House about China, and I don't like that particular reason why I'm a beneficiary. But, you know, when we talk about this 21st century relationship between China and the United States, you know, right now we're in a phase of it where there's a lot of paranoia about China, and there's demand for a kind of trusted alternative, and drone code is that.
Perfect. So what today matters to you in the drone industry? What problems are you trying to solve? What thing do you think we need to achieve as a community together?
Yeah. So I'm paradoxically, my ambition when we started was to make robots fly, and it was super nerdy. My ambition now is to make robots boring. I would like to, this is not about the drone. I don't care, you know, I quote unquote don't care about drones. I actually really don't care that much about the drone itself. When I say boring, what I mean is easy, invisible. It just does the job. So you know, one of the stories I tell is my grandfather invented the automatic sprinkler system, and my little small family fortune came from his patents on the automatic sprinkler system. And this is in Los Angeles, and they were greening the desert, et cetera. Now, sprinkler is a robot that you can just plant and forget. It's super boring. It just works. And that always inspired me. It's like, if drones could be like sprinklers, where you just kind of put them out there and they just work, that would be great. Because we don't care about the drone, we care about the data. So what's stopping us from making drones as easy as a sprinkler? There were a few technology things, but right now the notion of a box with a button We can do that. And on construction sites, we're pretty close to a box with a button. Now, why do we even need a button? And the answer there is regulation. The FAA requires a pilot in command. Now, it's neither a pilot nor are they in command, but there has to be human present. So, right now our vision, and over the next year or so, we'll get there. Our vision is that there's a construction site, and at 7 a.m., the first guy gets there, and he opens the gate, and he opens the trailer, and he starts the generator, and he pushes the red button on the box, and the drone does its thing. And then he's off doing other things. He's got a high school degree, and he's got lots of other functions, but all he does is push the button because somebody has to push the button. And then over time, the regulations will change so that he doesn't have to be there to push the button. Maybe headquarters could push the button, or maybe headquarters could push the button and many drones could take off, et cetera.
Right.
And then we forget about them. And great technologies, just become invisible. They just work. Electricity, it just works. Wi-Fi, it kind of just works. Well, maybe Wi-Fi doesn't just work, but we're close. But great technologies disappear, and I would like drones to disappear so that we can focus on what really matters, which is the data.
So how can someone, whether it's a manufacturer, whether it's a software developer, or an end user, impact the way that regulations are being considered right now? Because you have maybe a privileged seat in some of these conversations, but not everyone does. For us fighting for the industry, how should we do that?
Well, there's two ways to do it. One is to prove they're safe, and the other is to prove they're useful. So it's my job at running drone code to prove that they're safe, and it's kind of your job as the application of drones to prove they're useful. If the industries, whether agriculture or public safety or construction or mining, whatever industries are saying, we need this data to be more efficient, to compensate for labor shortages, to create the world we all want. And if we have an advocate, an evangelist for drones on the kind of pull side, and I'm sitting here pushing on the regulatory side, then it works. So, again, if drones are considered obnoxious toys, it's not going to happen. If drones are considered weapons, it's not going to happen. If drones are considered an essential part of the American economy's growth, that's when it's going to happen.
Yeah, and to be honest, this podcast is actually created from the concept that I had where not enough people are sharing success stories about the drone industry. And the people that want to hear it are people within companies, maybe, that already have an affinity for the technology. But we're not reaching out to the finance people, the legal people, the janitor, to the CEO.
Absolutely. And I mean, we got it. We had it so easy in the early days because all you needed to find is a nerd. And the nerd like, drone, awesome, robot, great, shiny, etc. We're past that. At this point, we need to get the CFO on board. We need to get the general counsel on board. We need to get the procurement guy on board. They don't care about robots. They don't care about technology. They just want it to work. And so I think that as we prove the utility, as we prove the ROI, as we prove that over time it can scale, and we get those ones to go from the pilot project to the ones to the tens to the hundreds to the thousands, etc. Then it's kind of the work is done. Then it's like, well, of course drones should be legal. Look how useful they are. And I can't believe in 2018 the sky's not dark with this over like farms, etc. I was sure that it was going to transform agriculture. We're going to feed the planet with drones, and I was clearly wrong, but. I hope I'm not wrong about construction and mining and, public safety and forest fires and things like that.
Yeah, well, and the question is regulation keeping us from getting to the point where we're feeding the world with drones? Or is it that the technology is being held back because of the fear of not doing it the right way?
It's easy to blame the regulators for holding us back, but I actually think that they've been, in part because of what you've done and what we've done by getting a lot of them out there, they realized they couldn't just sort of like say no. They had to find ways to say yes. And so I think the regulators have been as good as regulators can be about accelerating the approval processes. No, and I mean, right now with Part 107, which is a pretty easy thing to do and use outside the United States. Right now we can find a way to do almost anything we want to do within current regulations. It's convincing the CFO to buy 10,000 of them. That's actually a harder problem.
Sure. Well, we can work on that together.
Absolutely.
So I have 5 fast answer questions, right? Just off the cuff. You ready to give them a shot?
Probably not, but go ahead.
Okay. In the next 5 years, will the FAA reduce the consumer accessible altitudes for UAVs?
Oh, wow.
Meaning drop it from 400 feet.
I have no idea because we don't do consumer anymore. But
sure, but for the consumers that are flying, will they say consumers stay under 200 and between 200 and 400 is commercial or something along those lines?
I'm gonna go with no, but that's not based on any knowledge or insight. But I'm gonna go with no.
No need to have knowledge on any of this. Okay, in the next 5 years, who will be the greatest hardware competitor to DJI?
Well, it really depends on how you define the market. Do you include, General Atomics and
to the commercial space, let's say.
To the commercial space. I believe it's going to be unique, along with 3DR, as part of our joint venture. And I say this because it sounds like I'm now pitting myself against DJI, but on the commercial side. So it gets there's a little bit of blurriness between commercial and civil. Civil is government and commercial is non-government. On the commercial side, it's going to be DJI all the way. I don't think anyone's going to successfully compete. We love DJI and we recommend them on all our commercial projects. On the civil sector, which is like the government that's not military, there I think it has a good chance to be the unique 3DR JV.
So do you see? I mean, this is kind of off of that, but like package delivery. Do you think that that's a significant thing that could happen in the next 5 years, and would that lead a commercial push?
Not in the next 5 years.
Okay.
Take my time horizon out further, and then maybe.
And maybe. Okay. In the next 5 years, what application will use the greatest amount of drones industrially?
That is a good one. I actually think it's going to be construction, and when I say construction, I mean the whole, engineering, earthworks, even some elements of mining, inspection, things like that. Construction is the second biggest industry in the world. It's one of the least digitized industries in the world. There are we have to build a lot more structures, and we're seeing a drive towards transforming this untransformed industry. Reality capture is the way they do it, digitizing it. And we chose construction as our first industry because we thought that would be the biggest. It's kind of a no-brainer.
Right.
And it's a closed site. They're already wearing hard hats. It's totally safe. They're already starting to digitize with things like building information modeling. Outside of city centers, that's going to be the one.
Okay. In the next 5 years, and this is perfect for the pushing the red button, will an entirely autonomous UAS system be allowable in the United States?
Oh, you ruined it with the United States part.
Well, I mean, sure.
It's going to be allowable somewhere.
It'll be allowable somewhere, and is it a problem that it's not the United States?
I just want it to happen.
Okay.
If it happens to the U.S., great. But I mean, I'm not going to wrap myself in the flag on this one. I just want it to happen. As a matter of fact, if it happens somewhere else, it might actually be more persuasive. That the United States feels like they're missing out.
For sure.
I think it is going to happen over that time period. I think it may happen in the United States in a sort of trivial pilot project sort of way. I think it's going to be tricky to happen at scale. In the United States. And then your next question is, well, where will it happen at scale? Now, I know we can do pilot projects everywhere, but will it happen at scale in China, for example? Will it happen at scale in Switzerland? Will it happen at scale in Africa? I don't know. It might actually happen weirdly in Japan. They're being quite progressive ahead of the 2020 Olympics, being quite progressive about improving the drone regulations. I suspect it's going to happen. It might happen as in like Israel, for example, for security. I think if it's going to happen, it's probably going to be in the security context of monitoring perimeters and things like that. Just having drones with infrared cameras and drone robots with cameras. So it probably is going to happen in your space, actually, of thermal and security monitoring.
Okay. And the last question, it's kind of a joke. 5 years from now, what is Chris Andserson dressing up for Halloween?
Well, last year I dressed up as a car seat, and I have to explain why. You won't remember this, but a couple years ago, Ford was trying to figure out how people would react to autonomous cars that didn't have drivers, like no driver. And so they dressed this college student up as a car seat. So it looked, the guy was actually driving, but he looked like a car seat driving, and so it looked like the car had no driver, just to see how people would react. And so I dressed up as a car seat for Halloween.
So you could do a reuse of that in 5 years from now?
I know I know I did not answer your question.
No, it's fine.
You think I should dress up as a box with a red button?
Oh, how good. How good. Yeah, it'll be like we'll just be on the cusp of making the box with the red button allowable, and then you'll dress up as it to see how the world reacts.
Just scoot around, see who push the button. Then what happens?
That's not bad. See who pushes the red button. If you just wear a red button, see how many people can't.
That's good. I do have to do something when they push the red button. It's kind of a jack in the box thing. I'll have to think about that.
Perfect. Two questions about what's next. First of all, what's the next big step for 3DR? Where are you guys going? What is the goal for 3DR?
The next step is to commercialize drone code, and so the joint venture we announced both with Esri and the joint venture with Unique and the partnership with Esri is largely to bring a solution to the government, the government should be using drones for all the efficiency reasons we talked about. Right now they can't for privacy security reasons, and so I believe that this hybrid, this kind of U.S.-Chinese cross-border a construct is exactly what solves the problem and creates a model for U.S.-Chinese collaboration going forward. So that's what we're betting on. And if it works, and we won't be back in the hardware industry, we have a partner doing that, but my vision of drone code that the world will demand an open system will have proven true.
Okay. And then what about for the rest of the industry? I think that there's these kind of like benchmarks or maybe thresholds the drone industry has gone through. Part 107, for me, I see that as a huge threshold.
Absolutely.
There's going to be others like BB loss allowance or new hydrogen batteries or maybe long duration flights. What is the next thing for the industry?
Well, on the negative side, I think it's going to be a lot of consolidation. It's kind of overexpanded. You saw even an Interdrone is a little bit smaller this year than it was the last.
Yeah.
So you're going to see consolidation. That happens. It happened in the PC industry. It happened in smartphones, et cetera. So that's just kind of a necessary reset of that. In terms of the next structural improvement, it could be beyond visual line of sight. That would be huge. I'm a little skeptical about. So it's very easy to do one-offs, pilot projects, IP experimental pilot programs and things like that. None of that kind of does it for me. I know it's an important step to do it, but I want to see scale deployment. Scale deployment of beyond visual line of sight will be fascinating to watch, and it's not going to happen everywhere at the same time. But there's going to be some city in America or elsewhere that authorizes a drone zone. Much like Phoenix did with autonomous cars, et cetera. They authorize a drone zone, and it's going to have an actual purpose, not just delivering pot to San Franciscans. Although that's I'm sure a good purpose, but it's going to have some utility. And it's not just going to be like in Africa, Zipline's doing that, delivering medicines. But that's great, but that's not a scalable solution because we don't happen to have medicine delivery in the developed world, and most of the economics are in the developed world. So I'd be really interested whether it's going to be Singapore or Chiba in Japan or Switzerland or Phoenix. When that happens and there's a real reason to use that, it's providing value, and it organically starts to grow, that's going to be a game changer.
So last question I have for you is, as a CEO of a respected company in the drone industry, for a young person that might be listening to this podcast or not, and they want to get into the drone game, whether it is as an engineer or a marketer or someone that wants to create something in this world, either how you would look at them to hire them or just what would you suggest the steps they take to be of value to this industry?
Yeah, I maybe give a surprising answer. I don't think they should focus on drones. I don't think they should study, control theory or dynamics. I think that's kind of a solved problem, or if it isn't a solved problem, it's going to be solved by our friends in Shenzhen. I think they should focus on the data. And that gets into things like artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, and things like that. I think they should sort of ignore drones and focus on making drones useful, and that is understand some real-world problem. I just came back from a session where they were focused on hail strikes on roofs, machine learning, observation of those. Find some real-world problem that can be solved with aerial imagery, but has not been solved yet, and focus on that. Focus on the data, not the drone.
So what about a philosophical thing like, failure and how to approach failure, or how to approach partnerships and not being afraid to partner. I mean, your example to me as a human being, not as a company or anything, but just looking at how you handled, first of all, the dismantling of your manufacturing, and then the way that now you're talking about DJI in such a positive light. You're talking about Unique in such a positive light. You're talking about people that could have been seen as competitors, and you're lifting everyone up together. What are some of the philosophical ways to look at this industry that we could all learn from, even if we're already in it?
Yeah, the funny thing is that it's very easy to get caught up in the blows of the day, and every day has some blow of some sort. And what makes you keep going? And the answer is there a there? Are we actually doing something important? Does the world want what we're making? And if there was ever a day where I felt like drones weren't a thing, or that there was really no opportunity for us to pursue, that would suck. That day has never happened. I think the initial thesis that putting sensors in the sky was a good thing, and that extending the internet to the air was important, I think that thesis is as true, maybe more true, than I thought it was back in the day, and I think it's going to take 100 years to play out. And so until we have the sky dark with sensors, I've got work to do, and I'm not going to focus on blow this and competition that.
Fair enough. So Chris, I know that you've added thermal capability to the site scan technology, or the site scan software. What first attracted you to thermal, and what have you learned since you've been working with the sensor technology?
Well, we went to thermal because the customers wanted thermal, and initially they wanted thermal for all the normal reasons you want thermal, which is to look at hot things, or look at temperature differentials and water ingress, this or insulation leakage there. But as we started to implement thermal, and then as FLIR came out with easier ways to combine thermal and RGB, we realized that it basically expanded the spectral resolution of everything we were gathering. Now, why does that matter? Well, a lot of what we do, like let's take a standard site scan. This would be where you take a camera, you take pictures, and you use photogrammetry to combine the pictures and create a point cloud or a mesh and things like that. And we do it typically by recognizing features and and combining them by recognizing the same feature over multiple images, and then you can pull out the geometry. Well, that's fine for big features. It's fine if there's difference in color and things like that. But let's say we want to image a telephone line that you're seeing against a gray telephone line. You're seeing against a relatively gray background. I mean, as you know, that telephone line is essentially invisible to the naked eye. It's invisible to RGB cameras, and so we couldn't do it. We couldn't image thin things with low contrast against the background. Switch to thermal. They're not both gray in thermal. One's hotter than the other. And now we suddenly have contrast where we had no contrast before. And so by simply adding a thermal image to the existing RGB image and being able to process them through the same photogrammetry software, we now have much better point clouds that show very fine features that were essentially invisible before. That was a surprise to us. And now that we've got it, we're like, why shouldn't all cameras use multispectral resolution? I mean, the answer is they're expensive, but they're only going to get cheaper over time. So we're converts, and we now recommend, if people can afford it, we would recommend combined RGB thermal on all missions.
Well, I know that you mentioned that your autonomous car racing thing, they're low-cost cars, but we believe in thermal in autonomous driving. We're big believers in that because of that contrast, and because you can have different, no light, no visibility with fog and smoke for autonomous driving cars. But maybe if you ever want to throw one in one of your rigs, you might start winning some races.
Funny you should mention that. I'm blanking on the name of the little module that you sell. The
ADK or the Lepton.
The Lepton, yeah, the Lepton. So the team I sponsor and have worked most closely on autonomous cars is called OpenMV, Open Machine Vision. It's a very small board that has the kind of the OpenCV software kind of built in, runs MicroPython, costs like $60, and it uses a standard camera. But in the new version, they have interchangeable. You can change the camera, and now you can put the Lepton on as well. And so we are now going to see whether we can maybe do exactly what I just described, which is have RGB and thermal, and be able to basically see the world better, drive faster, and win races by adding cheap thermal to cheap cars.
Chris, honestly, huge honor for me to sit with you and chat. Let's do it again sometime.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to head to FLIR.com/Delta for more episodes and downloads. Also, subscribe or follow to make sure to catch all the FLIR Delta content. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, someone you'd like us to sit down with, or a way we can make this podcast even better, make sure to send us your thoughts to delta.podcast@FLIR.com. Again, thanks for making FLIR Delta part of your connection with the drone industry.